later on. All right. So business law is a very important part of every business program because it affects us in how we do business. There's also a lot of regulations that are involved. Um, Certain businesses have a lot more regulations to follow than other businesses, but there are regulations across the board. Regulations could be also looked at as laws. If you break a regulation, they can charge you with something. And of course, a big part of the law is how businesses pay taxes, and that's important to understand. So this is an overview of the topics you'll be getting in Business Law 1. And if those of you that keep going to Business Law 2, that's great. All right, so in essence, the book starts off with just a general understanding that laws have been around for quite a long time, and it's roughly speaking how a society decides to govern itself. And so it sets standards of behavior for how you're supposed to act, how you're not supposed to act, both for individuals and businesses. It establishes certain rights that people have, so not just behavior, but certain rights that parties have. And of course, laws are put together by the government. And so the court system, the only court system that we have, is literally a government-run system. It's a branch of government. You probably know about the 3 branches of government, right? Executive, legislative, and judicial. So these are very unique to government. And what the courts are meant to do is to see if they could remedy situations in which, for our cases, a loss took place. In many instances, when you go to court, you basically have to prove a loss to the court. And that loss then is something the court can remedy, right? It can make you whole, can bring you back to where you were. Or in some cases, if the loss is due to something really terrible, not just bring you back to where you were, but reward you for going through all of that stuff, right? So, so that's really sort of how all that kind of works. But again, the laws are created by the legislative branch of our governments. And we have laws that are federal, so that's out of our federal government in Washington, D.C. They have certain jurisdiction of topics that their laws cover. Most of the laws that you and I are subject to are state laws, as well as your local city or town ordinances. Those are the laws that really affect us day to day, much more than, of course, federal law does affect us, but not as much as the local and state laws. They really sort of have a major impact on how we do, how we live our life, how we do business, etc. Business law, by the way, is jurisdiction of the states. So state law is going to really override almost everything in terms of how businesses do business. When it's an interstate business, then it falls under jurisdiction of federal laws. So this is some of the differences here. But for the most part, if you're going to be setting up a business someday, it's going to be the state laws and the local government laws that are going to, and regulations that are going to impact you. So the supreme law of the land, let's just hope this sticks, is the US Constitution. And so, we're supposed to, this is the highest law of the land, the Constitution of the United States. Of course, the Constitution of the United States was created after, of course, a lot of our colonies became states, and they created constitutions. So Connecticut, if you ever go to Connecticut, you might see their license plate, the Constitution State, on their license plates. It's generally referred to as the model or the template for the United States Constitution was the Connecticut State Constitution that they had prior to the US being the US. Remember, we started as a confederacy before we decided we needed a federal government. And so it's important to know state governments were, in essence, created first before the federal government was. So that's why Connecticut sort of takes itself as the basis of the US Constitution. So basically, the federal government, the state government, and local governments create laws and regulations that not only do they create them, but they also have to enforce them. The enforcement issue is a legislative issue. It's not a, it's a executive issue. So the legislative branch, as you know, creates the laws. So the Congress of the United States creates federal laws. But here in the state of New York, we have a state legislature and a state senate. So those two bodies are the legislative branches of our state government. They create the laws. In our local government, the city council or the town board of, they used to be called selectmen. I think they've certainly changed the name since then. They are the ones that create certain regulations and laws for local matters that they have jurisdiction over. And so, but making a law, creating a law doesn't mean it's going to get done, right? So it's the executive branch that has to make sure it gets done. And the executive branch for the federal government is the president and the cabinet members that administer government. For the state government, it's the governor and all of the administration that the governor has. For the local government, it's going to be, either the mayor's office and the administrative offices that stem from that, or there's usually someone who's the head of a town council, and there's a government structure for that administrates the law. So every form of government also has to not just make laws, but administer the laws. It's the court's job, in essence, to make sure that if there's a dispute in the law, meaning the law is not fairly applied or biased in some way, does it violate the rights and privileges that are outlined in the Constitution for individuals and businesses? And so their job is always to sort of interpret the laws and how they should be looked at or dealt with. That's really, and what you're seeing now, we have a Supreme Court nominee who's getting questions about those types of things. Basically speaking, it's up to the judge to interpret those types of things. And there's different ways of looking at it. And that's part of what you're hearing about today. If you're watching it all or hearing about the Barrett nomination confirmation process in the news. So that's basically, the interpretation of that law and whether the law is valid under the constitutional rights afforded to all of us is really the main job of the court. And if it is not, if it does violate the Constitution, is there a way to remedy that? Sometimes the courts find their own remedy. Sometimes the courts throw it back onto the legislative branch or the administrative branch or executive branch to fix it and make it legal, make it so it doesn't violate anything. So there's a lot of sources of laws. We just talked a little bit about, how legislative bodies like the Congress of the United States, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate, they make federal laws. Locally here in the state of New York, we have our own legislative branch, sort of a House of Representatives here and a Senate, state Senate. Those are legislative bodies, and they enact laws that are considered statutory laws. So these were enacted by acts of the legislative body that were signed into law by the executive branch. But what's really important to understand, and I think that's part of what you're hearing with the questions to Judge Barrett in the confirmation process, is judges' decisions actually make up part of the law. Okay. And so when a Massachusetts judge decided to legalize same-sex marriage in Massachusetts, it now became part of common law of Massachusetts. That was in conflict with a lot of other states' laws that didn't recognize same-sex marriage. So it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, well, we've seen this before. Where did they see this before? They saw this before because in the South, if you were heterosexual but different race, you couldn't, your marriage was not valid either. And there's a good movie called based on the Lovings case that shows that it was a white man and a black woman that got married in Virginia, but it wasn't recognized in Virginia. You couldn't have a mixed race marriage. That also went to the Supreme Court. And basically speaking, you had some states that recognized that interracial marriage and other states that didn't. The Supreme Court said, well, it's going to be recognized everywhere. And actually, that was really the basis for same-sex marriage. It's like, look, we've been through this before, whether it's different races, different, same sex, same race, different sex, different races. We've been through this before. If one state recognizes a marriage, don't they all recognize the marriage? And the Supreme Court said, yes, we do. They have to recognize that marriage. So judges' decisions actually come up to be part of the law. And that's what common law is. Okay, it's a body of law that's been created by all of the decisions of the court. Okay, it's also known as case law, or as you see here, judicial law. Common law, right, in this case, has a standard, a doctrine, stare decisis. It's a Latin term. I'm probably pronouncing it right. But one of the issues with common law is once the court made a decision on something, do the courts now stand by that decision in the future? This has been going on in this country for a long time. The issue of Roe versus Wade, which has always been the landmark case for abortion rights, it was decided 50 years ago. We're still debating that. Like, well, do we stand by the previous decision or not? You saw that in some of the questions to Judge Barrett. What do you think? She's not going to give away anything because she doesn't have a court case in front of her. But it's one of those types of things. The thing with gay marriage as well, they think, oh, they're going to overturn gay marriage. Well, if the courts previously said gay marriage is okay, it's legal, it's recognized everywhere. Can the court, is the court staying by that previous decision, or is it going to overturn a previous decision? And that's what's going on in Congress right now, in the Senate, when they grill Judge Barrett on the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Are you going to be the vote that kills Obamacare? Right? Takes healthcare away from millions of people. Well, that's basically a question of, are you going to stand by the previous decision that the healthcare law is legal? Or are you going to overturn it? You're going to change the court decision. And so this basically has become, this legal term has become, and legal doctrine has become politicized for people that want to change certain things. And you see that play out on our political process when judges are confirmed, whether to the lower benches or the higher benches, like we have now in Supreme Court. but, will they abide by what other courts said? Now, in some cases, it's perfectly reasonable to overturn a previous case. Segregation was legal for many, many years. The Supreme Court even said so. Well, that eventually became overturned. It was like, well, no, actually, it doesn't make any sense to have white schools and black schools, and white restaurants and black restaurants, and white bathrooms and black bathrooms. It doesn't make any sense to do segregation anymore. And they overturned an earlier previous decision. So it's not like it doesn't happen, it happens. And I think that's what a lot of people have been looking at here. But in essence, when courts keep decisions the same, keep the doctrine the same, it means that our laws are a lot more stable and things are predictable. And so you can sort of understand how to apply the law in life because these decisions have already been made. So again, a statutory law, a statute is a law passed by Congress or a legislature. So all of the laws that have been enacted by a legislative branch are statutory laws. Okay. Now, for businesses, probably one of the most important statutory laws that you're going to be learning about, particularly in Business Law 2, is something called the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. And this basically helps to eliminate differences to help simplify interstate commerce. Because again, business law is jurisdiction of the states. However, when you have interstate commerce, which we all do, most businesses, even Dutchess, we have students that come from Connecticut and whatever. So what happens when you have interstate business going on? Well, that's what the UCC is meant to help eliminate those differences and simplify the interstate commerce. So businesses are not affected by so many dueling laws between states. Okay. Legal experts have also said, look, what the administration has done in terms of the government, those are regulations. They actually become part of the law. That's called administrative law. So when the IRS says that, well, when your grandmother gave you $10,000, part of that is taxable. Okay. Well, who determined that? Well, the administrative agency called the IRS determined that. And then it was held up in court because there's a whole other court system with the tax courts. And so a case might have come up. So look, we gave this money to so-and-so. We don't think it's a taxable thing, but the IRS, which is an administrative body of the executive branch, says that part of it is taxable. And the court says, well, they're actually right. Part of it is taxable. Now that becomes part of the law. It becomes part of the law. And so those regulations become part of the law. We're seeing that too with COVID. We have a lot of regulations that you have to wear a mask, right? When you go inside a business and so forth. Well, what if you break that regulation? You're breaking the law, and the court is saying, yeah, that's not something that came out of Congress, or it didn't come out of the courts. It came from your local health department that said this is a regulation. Okay, and the courts held it up. So it becomes part of the law. So law is built over a lot of different things. And this is a couple of ways in which we look at it. So there's public law and private law, okay? And so public law, basically, the law that helps deal with relationships between individuals or businesses and society, right? And the community at large, okay? So violations of public law are often called crimes, okay? It's a crime because society is at risk from the behavior, right? Not just a particular individual, a particular business, but actually now it's spilled over into, it could affect all of us in one way, shape, or form. So what type of crimes that affect businesses that are part of this public law? Well, burglary, robbery, and theft. So when a business is broken into or robbed from, the law doesn't look at that, okay, that business was affected, but this could happen to anybody in our society. If one business is robbed, well, what's stopping you from being robbed, right? So robbery, burglary, theft is considered a crime because everybody in society, in essence, could be a victim of that. Embezzlement is, again, part of theft. You're taking money, taking property from, well, usually taking money from others, whether other individuals or businesses. It's considered a crime, violation of public law. Businesses can also suffer from forgery when someone is, and you probably know this, or you probably heard these types of stories where people forged signatures on checks to grab money. That's a crime. That's a crime. Violation of public law. Society is affected by that. When businesses use inaccurate weights, measures, and labels, it could put society in jeopardy. Individuals and other businesses could be in jeopardy from not knowing exactly what they're buying, or maybe that's harmful, or maybe they are, in essence, it's almost like theft, because if you say you're buying a pound and you're actually only giving them 3/4 of a pound, you're stealing from that person. Yeah. The use of mail to defraud. Okay, well, that's been in the, that's been in the news lately in terms of mail and fraud. But this particular here is, are you using the mail to defraud an individual or defraud a business? So this could happen by businesses sending false types of claims to certain individuals in order to take money. Lying about certain things is also a fraud. So there's definitely ways in which it can be part of it. If you buy stolen property, if you are filing false income tax returns, all these types of things are considered crimes. Private law is really about the what happens when two individuals or two businesses have a problem with each other. So private law is sort of dealing with just these things between individuals, and there's a lot in which this happens, and we'll see this. So a tort is different than a crime because a tort is a violation of private law. A crime is a violation of public law. One of the most important things regarding torts is the question is whether, was it intentional or not? Did you mean to do it or did you not mean to do it? And so some intentional acts is, of course, if you're shoplifting or if you're embezzling money from an employer, you meant to do it. You saw it, you put it in your pocket, you meant to do it. But there's other times where you don't really mean to do it, but it happens. That's what negligence is about. So negligence, you might not have meant to cause any harm, but harm was caused. Okay. Oftentimes we use the reasonable care standard to look at negligence. Why it's a violation of private law is because negligence often results in some injury to another person. Okay. The example here is the truck driver who loses control of the truck and slams into a building. Okay. So clearly here, a tort has been committed. It's a violation of private law because there was an individual, a truck driver, who slammed into business property. So again, it's damaging individuals or damaging property. So in essence, the owner of the building can sue the driver because the driver caused a loss to that owner of the building. The owner now has a building that might not be able to be occupied. It certainly needs to be repaired if the damage is quite well. So that's a loss to the owner of the building. And the driver's employer can also sue to cover the cost of repairing the truck, right? Because it's the business's truck that got rammed into the building. Not the driver didn't own that truck; it was a business property. So that caused damage to the truck. Now, why it's negligent might have been, well, did that person fall asleep? Maybe that person has a medical condition, narcolepsy, and fell asleep on the wheel because it's undiagnosed. Maybe the person was drunk. Maybe the person was high or on drugs and didn't see things well. There's different ways in which that affect people's judgments that cause harm. It might not be intentional, which is what negligence is really about. So here are some other torts that affect business that are very interesting. One of there's a difference between slander and libel. So can you sue for an indirect false oral statement that brings injury to a person or a business? Well, it depends. Yes and no. If you're in politics, the answer is no, because if you watch all the political ads, all you're seeing in many cases is just slanderous. I mean, these are, in many instances, very exaggerated oral statements against another person meant to cause injury, meant to take away votes. But political activities are almost always exempt from slander in this regard. However, but what if you started posting information, bad information about a business online with the intent of ruining their reputation? Well, that would be liable, right? False written statements, but false oral statements. Anything that's supposed to be injuring a person or a business's reputation, whether it's oral or whether it's in writing, is technically a tort, but you have to have proof of that. So a recording of a false oral statement that can be given to the courts as evidence and this, once these people started saying this, I lost this or I lost that. You have to prove the loss. Same thing with a false written, and this is easier to do because we have so many social media things that you can post stuff to, and so you got to watch what you do. I would suggest, in essence, just so you can stay away from this issue, is never emote online. So what is to emote? Well, never emote means to not put your emotions online, because sometimes those emotions can be heavily negative, heavily angry, even threatening. And now those written statements are part of wherever you posted it, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever you do, right? So now it's in writing. Now it's real, and people can use it against you. I know for a fact, I've seen and heard of several cases where people have gotten restraining orders or people have gotten other types of things from seeing written stuff online about them and sued people. So I think this is a very, very important thing for this generation, particularly that you're so used to posting your emotions online. I would say don't. I would say if it's a happy emotion, oh, I'm happy to announce I just got married, or I'm happy to announce a new job, those are fine. Those are fine. But if you're angry about something, whatnot, don't be writing this shit down online. You're just going to get yourself into trouble. That's my advice to you as both a teacher, a parent, a father, etc. I mean, I just don't do it. Don't put yourself in that situation because these things are real. Fraud is about misrepresentation of facts. Um, and so, that's it's one of the biggest things we talk about regarding, all these, what I think are, in essence, ridiculous tweets. President calling Remdesivir a cure, or hydroxychlorophyll, a way to treat things. Those are false, misleading statements. That's for sort of misrepresentation of fact. Even the maker of those drugs don't say that. But if the maker of the drug said that, that would definitely be fraud. That is the definition of fraud. Whereas as a business claims that they're doing something, or this product can cure you or do this, and that can't do any of that stuff, that's fraud. It's a misrepresentation of facts, and it does take advantage of others. The same thing true is with the product itself. If there's anything wrong with how the product is designed or created that could bring in a possible problem, that's called product liability. And manufacturers have to make sure that when they create a product, that it's not going to cause any harm to others. And we've been through this a lot. I think, one of the most interesting ones, space heaters. Manufacturers put very specific instructions on those space heaters. They have to be used at a certain distance. They have to be kept away from certain things because they can cause fires. Lights on Christmas trees that have gone dried and all this other stuff. I mean, there's all different types of products out there that are dangerous if we use them incorrectly. And so this is part of a product liability, and all consumers, will have the right to sue the manufacturer for products that cause them harm, but it doesn't mean you're always going to win. You have to prove that the product in some way, shape, or form was designed incorrectly. It was actually designed to cause harm. And so, that's part of product liability for businesses. Certainly personal injury that results in an accident or from a defective product or whatnot that causes personal injury. That's a huge problem. That's a big tort. And then, of course, we don't hear about this often enough. Unfair competitive practices are often business to business type of thing. But, Amazon has been accused many instances of stopping people from competing. And that's because Amazon, for a vendor who sets up an account on Amazon and sells a product, Amazon knows how the sales of those products are going. And what Amazon has been doing is saying, oh, this product is selling quite well. Let's make our own and sell it cheaper. That might be considered, to me it is, but that might be considered an unfair competitive practice, where Amazon is both charging the vendor to actually have an account on Amazon and sell their stuff, but then they're keeping track of all that stuff and now selling that stuff themselves at a lower price. I would say that's unfair competitive practice myself, but again, I'm just a teacher behind a PowerPoint screen here, not a judge or an attorney arguing that. All right, court system. We have federal courts and we have state courts. Okay, those are very distinct because the federal court deals with federal laws, laws that have been created by Congress, and that's the federal court system. But you and I are very unlikely to deal with the federal court system at all. What we're almost always likely to deal with is our state court system. And so state courts, because there's 50 states, there's 50 court systems. Most court systems are structured the same. They have lower courts called trial courts. They have courts that review the trial court called an appellate court. And then there's courts at the very top that actually have to decide disagreements within the appellate system, and that's this. In our federal system, it's called the Supreme Court. But in the state system, most states call their top court the Supreme Court, except New York. New York is extremely unique. The Supreme Court in New York is actually a trial court. It's a trial court. It's very interesting how New York is quite unique in this way. So again, in the federal system, you have your district courts, which are your trial courts. This is where everything starts. Evidence is produced and witnesses and all the different things are done there. However, in order to have a system that's relatively fair, there might be cases that may cause the other side to say, look, they're not really following the rules, or I don't think this was fair about this case, blah, blah, blah. So they can appeal it. You know, they have a right to appeal in a lot of cases. A lower case or a district court ruling doesn't necessarily mean that that's it, that the case is over. There's actually, in some cases, a right to appeal. The appeal court is different because the appeal court is just the attorneys and the judges. And here, there's no witnesses, no new evidence. It's all about, okay, what was unfair? What was unfair about this process? That's what the appeals court is looking at. What was so unfair about this process that we're looking at this again? The appeals court has two choices. It can say, we agree with the district court. There's nothing wrong with the process, and the judgment of the court is good. Or they can disagree. In which case, say, oh, something actually was wrong with the process. What happens if they disagree? Well, oftentimes you need a tiebreaker, and that's basically what the Supreme Court is. It'll look at the judgments here and see if those are applied or not. Sometimes the Supreme Court will refuse to hear a case from the appellate court, which is basically their way of saying, we agree with the appellate court, don't bother us. When the Supreme Court wants to hear a case, they feel there's a question that was left unanswered. It's usually quite narrow. Sometimes it's very broad. But there's a question that was unanswered that they need to look at. And so they'll agree to hear a case based on that. State systems work the same way. Everything starts with what's called basically a trial court, which is they call a court of original jurisdiction. So we have our trial courts here at Dutchess County in Poughkeepsie. We have our trial courts here. What happens is that if there's something going on at the trial court, in some cases you have an automatic right of appeal. So there is an appellate court system for those that want to review or think they have a case that's in some way, shape, or form the original jurisdiction case was not tried properly. There was things that were wrong with it. And then if, again, it can be appealed in many cases all the way up to the Supreme Court of the state or the highest court in the state. In New York, the highest court of the state is called the Court of Appeals in Albany. The only difference in the systems, again, the state system deals with state laws. The federal system deals with federal laws. However, the one very interesting thing about the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court has the right to review state rulings, which is why back in 2000, when George W. Bush and Al Gore were the party's nominations for the election, Florida kept flipping. Florida was, okay, well, Florida is now for Gore. No, now we're going to take that back. Now Florida is now for Bush. It went back and forth. And so the Supreme Court of Florida said, okay, no, it's done. It's for Gore. And they appealed that to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, well, that court didn't rule properly. This ruling is actually this, and that in that case, that meant George W. Bush was the winner. So on occasion, the Supreme Court of the United States can review and even overturn state Supreme Court rulings based on what happened. Again, I told you earlier in our talk that the State Court of Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Supreme Court, back in I forget it was the 90s or 2000, said gay marriage was okay. We recognized gay marriage. That was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. It was reviewed, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision, which is now the case across the country. So, so this is our court system in a nutshell. Again, states have their laws and they have their own court system. The federal government has its own laws and has its own court system. The Supreme Court has that right to review decisions by state courts. Some cases it's necessary. Some cases some states say, yeah, everyone who worked in this place has to join a union. If they don't join a union, they still got to pay a fee. Well, other states say, no, actually, you don't. These workers don't have to join a union. If there's a union, they don't have to pay the fee. That went all the way to the Supreme Court from Illinois. And the Supreme Court said, actually, no, you don't have to pay the fee if you don't want to be part of the union. It hurt unions a couple of years ago. But it was a state Supreme Court ruling that was then reviewed by the United States Supreme Court. So this happens a lot. Again, this slide basically shows you what the federal courts hear in terms of that. The federal court, there's some very special federal courts. Certainly, all federal crimes or violations of those will be held by the federal court. So, the idiots that wanted to kidnap the governor of Michigan and planning to kidnap the governor of North Carolina afterwards, well, that's a federal crime. So the federal court system will hear that overwhelmingly. Those are charged with federal hate crimes, things like that. Those are federal statutes. But not all those folks were done, because kidnapping could also be a local thing. So that's one of those things. But there's some special courts that the federal government has. Bankruptcy courts are that. There's a tax court, and there's courts that deal with very specific things, whether it's the Postal Service laws or things regarding intangible assets like copyrights and patents, things like this. The federal court also deals with maritime cases, so things that are dealt with offshore on the sea, federal jurisdiction. And of course, we only looked at the state system as well, okay? So the court of original jurisdiction at the state level is where everything starts. That's where everything happens. It's the very first court that stuff happens. And the only court in which testimony and other stuff is produced. Once the court rules, and if there's a right to an appeal, the appellate court then looks at the lower court's ruling to see if there were any errors, whether it's in the process or whatnot. And the appellate court is just the judges and the lawyers for each case. There's no witnesses, there's no nothing. That only happens at the court of original jurisdiction. When you watch a lot of TV programs, as I do, I like a lot of TV programs that deal with legal stuff myself. I'll watch it on occasion when I have time. That basically is a court of original jurisdiction. Now, even though it's a TV show, they have actually gotten permission to be part of the local jurisdiction. So its rulings on this TV show are upheld by the local court system, which is usually a state court system. So that makes them binding. They're entertaining, but it's legal. It's legal. And of course, there are other types of courts, particularly at the state level. There's a lot of courts at the state level. Small claims courts for, minor infractions where it's not a lot of money. I think usually it's up to $5,000 or so. Traffic court, sadly, that happens to a lot of people. You get You get a ticket, speeding ticket, you want to dispute that. I wasn't really going 85, officer. I was going 90. Well, you can go to traffic court and try your luck there. If you get married and you don't want to be married anymore, divorce court is a state. Large probate court deals with wills. It also deals with custody of children. If you were married and have kids, who gets them? Who gets custody? That's your local divorce courts, probate courts. And of course, there's a special system for juvenile, folks who are not adults but are committing crimes. That's juvenile court. And that's going to be our lesson today. Any questions?